Welcome to your student radio station, bringing you great shows.
Good evening, welcome to These Charming Men.
The Jam Jar here, I'm Matilda and I'm Meg.
You are listening to Bangs and Mash. This is going to be great.
Oh my God.
Great music.
An era-defining band. New single from Radiohead.
Great interviews.
Hi, this is Frank Turner.
My name is Sadiq Khan. I'm running through the Merrill.
My name is Eddie Izzard.
And keep up to date with the arts.
A poet, a playwright and a cultural icon. He is, of course, William Shakespeare.
News and politics.
What about if the people are too stupid, though, to make this decision?
People make that decision. That's the entire point of a democracy.
Sports.
So close. He slipped through, brings it through on his left foot, just over the back of the net.
And on-campus coverage.
When you think of Battle of the Bands, it just offers that real diversity.
Welcome to the big decision. This is Varsity Rugby.
And dying moments of the game.
Online and on 12:51 a.m. This is Raw.
My name's Sophie Walker and you're listening to Raw.
My name's Professor A.C. Grayling and you're listening to Raw.
The Bore, creating conversation on campus. In this issue of The Bore.
Don't miss a special Pride tribute in light of the Orlando shootings. A report on Eddie Izzard's trip to Warwick. Check out the article on the 24-hour library announcement. A comment piece on the lessons we must learn from the Stanford rape case. Finally, a treat yourself exam to-do list.
Fancy writing for The Bore? Check out their Facebook page for more information on how to get involved, and don't forget to follow them on Twitter for breaking news at Warwick Bore.
I'm Winston McKenzie and you're listening to Raw 51 a.m.
You are listening to Raw, and it is Perspectives back for our final week of Term 3. Sorry you're going to have to live your summer without us. I'm sure you'll miss us, but there will be loads of politics going on, so if you need to get your weekly dose of politics, rather, tune into BBC or something like that, something a bit more mediocre. On the panel this week for our final show, we have Barnaby Merrill, recurring guest, who is not in a very good mood today. I've previously introduced him as not the leader of the Labour Party, a member of the Labour Party, although he might well be soon leader of the Labour Party. But you're no longer a member, are you, Barnaby?
I think from the end of July I'm no longer. No, I'm having a full-time neoliberal shill.
And would you like to tell us why you're no longer a member of the Labour Party?
Go on my Facebook if you really like. I mean, I could read my statement out. I'm not very happy. It's all a bit of a mess. It's not helping people. This is bad. Not good.
Right, and two people that might take a different view to that are Ben Newsham and Charlie Hindhaugh. Charlie Hindhaugh, who are both here. Sorry, your surname always gets me, Charlie. How are we both, and are we both thinking of not being Labour supporters in the near future?
Well, I'm still a member, if I count for anything.
And you don't think Corbyn should go, just out of interest to you?
I'm conflicted now.
Right, we'll get back into that later. That's interesting that you're conflicted. And Charlie, what do you think about the whole situation out of interest?
So I'm a Labour Party member and campaigner, and it's been a difficult few days, and it's certainly been a lot to think about. And although I voted for Corbyn, I'm starting to feel it's his time to step down.
Very interesting indeed. Tim is also here, who is our previous head of sport at the Student Radio Station. And unfortunately, Tim, this is your last week, so you're finally on Perspectives. You've been given a shot.
First time you've invited me.
Oh, come on. But are you pleased to be on, Tim?
I'm very delighted to be on, and I think it's been quite a turbulent 2 weeks to say the very least, and happy to talk about it. I think in particular for us students, it's something that we need to discuss and get off our chests.
Brilliant. And talking to the Raw exec, we are also joined by Jack Abbey, who is our head of news. Jack, are you looking forward to getting involved in the political conversations of the day?
Yeah, it should be good. It got me out of bed this morning, which is the main thing. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Says a lot. Right, we're going to get straight into it. And something that I previously forgot to sort of talk about and was reminded of Barnaby Merrill this morning. While we're talking about the Brexit plan here, what if there is a plan, there's been a lot of cases of post-Brexit racism that I'm pretty sure people on both sides of the debate can't deny. There's been events in Gloucestershire, funnily enough. Sorry to point you out there, Jack.
No, that's fine. I was going to point it out.
There was an event in Gloucestershire, where there were some people filming this group of angry people with their England flags on the other side of the road, and they were shouting some pretty unsavoury things, to be brutally honest. But that has been a sort of recurring thing over the last few days, really, since we voted Brexit. Barnaby, was this to be expected, do you think, this sort of, because it's the old saying, perhaps used by the Remain campaign, that not all people who vote Brexit are racists, but all the racists do vote Brexit. Do you agree with that?
Yes, basically. I mean, a lot of the Leave campaign and, to be honest, government policy over the last 6 years or so has been sort of dog whistling in racial terms, I think. People are being encouraged to blame immigrants and foreigners for their problems. And I think what you're getting is a number of dim-witted racists voted to leave the European Union and then thought that the 52% of people who voted to leave all agree with them. And so therefore, since over half the country agree with them, they can say what they've been thinking for years, because obviously everyone agrees with it, right?
Yeah, well, Ben, you were on the, going back to the actual election that happened on Thursday, you were on the show. You came on from 10 o'clock till midnight. We have a good show, but we were quite naive in that we all thought Remain would win based on the data that we were given. There's room service here, just to let you all know. Tim Arstall, the future Radio 1 DJ.
I'm just a bit of a big deal, so I got someone to bring me a latte. I'm a real left-wing guy, getting my coffee boy to...
Champagne socialist.
Unlike Jeremy Corbyn.
Snap. Nice that I'm being given that sort of service, being the presenter, but, that's fine. We'll move on. But, Ben, we all thought Remain were going to win, except from Ross Copeland, who was on the show, who was adamant that Brexit were going to win, and indeed Ross was right in the end. And a lot of us, did sort of scoff, I think, because all the polls going out. I think UCOV released a poll, and everyone was releasing polls saying that Remain were going to win. How much of a shock was that when because did you go to bed that night?
I didn't.
Were you one of these people that stayed up and watched Dimbleby or listened to LBC?
Yeah, I stayed up for the Dimble banter. Yeah, for the second time in 2 years, I let myself get severely disappointed by opinion polling, I think.
Yeah, and it was a strange, because it was announced about 4 a.m. that Remain could no longer win, and that seemed to shock a lot of people. Charlie, you were at Glastonbury when this was all announced. Were you up, or were you partying, or whatever they do at these festivals? Sound like such an old man.
So I woke up to just hearing the news about, must have been 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, just hearing it waft through the tent, and it was devastating. But to be honest, for a few weeks now, I'd come to the conclusion that we were going to leave. Really? Yeah. And just the lacklustre campaign from Labour and from the official Remain campaign as well. It was a very disappointing campaign, and I didn't have much faith in it, and I kind of come to terms with it, and that we were sadly going to leave.
And on the sort of demographics of the election result, I think it was about 29% of 18 to 30-year-olds turned out to vote. And in university towns like this, on campuses like this, if you were to ask anyone, I think, at the university, they would say that they were dead certain Remain were going to win. That is perhaps because we live in this bubble whereby I reckon about 80, 90, probably about 90% of people here voted to Remain, or would have voted to Remain if indeed they'd got out to vote. Tim, this idea of young people not turning out to vote, it's becoming a real problem, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the main thing that we should say is that the main dialogue coming from our generation is that we've been sort of given a horrible deal by the older generations. I think in particular that graph that I've seen from YouGov, the poll as to how people have voted based on their age range, and overwhelmingly it's young people who are voting Remain, and people with an average age of 74 who are voting to leave the EU. And then you have all this dialogue, but then you look at the actual figures for who's turning out, and you wonder, where are 70% of our generation who, and this decision, it's us that it's going to affect, and it really makes me think, where are these people? Who are they? But at the same time, I think just to sort of address Brexit as a whole, I think we've seen time and time again in politics, if people are patronised, if people are told that something isn't going to happen, then they react to that. And the dialogue in this referendum has been telling people who are pro-Brexit that maybe they're implying they're racist, saying Brexit will never happen, and telling them again and again that it's just not something that can be changed. And that is why people have come out in the numbers to react to that. And this kind of backlash in politics is something that's underlining 2016 politics. It's a backlash to the established classes saying that something can't happen to a majority who will come out and tell them otherwise.
Charlie?
And the appeals to young people from the Remain campaign were completely were patronising. Yeah. Like, do you remember the vote-in, surf-in, stay-in campaign that they tried to launch a few weeks ago? And it was embarrassing. And for so many reasons why to get young people engaged in voting to stay in the EU, I felt that the social arguments, the arguments for travelling, for holidays, for workers' rights, for the ability for free movement around these 28 member states were never really talked about. And so, the reasons for young people to stay in were not made, and the Remain campaign was patronising towards young voters.
But who do you blame for that, Charlie? Do you think it is a case of previous government and this government's fault? Is it the fault of politicians? Is it the fault of the young people who don't go out to vote? Can you attach the blame to anyone, do you think?
It's difficult to attach blame, but I'd certainly say the campaign, well, very much. The official campaign, I think, has a lot to answer for. Also, the fact that the Conservative Party is predominantly made up of older people. Well, and I think those kind of arguments that will appeal to young voters were never going to be at the forefront of the campaign.
I think we have educational problems. I genuinely think my experience of going to sixth form, even when I was in sixth form at a grammar school in Birmingham, which was constantly going on about how it was such a great school, politics wasn't really taught as a compulsory area of study. I think the reason we have such a kind of general level of apathy with young voters is because they just don't know enough to be engaged. If you go to year 9 and make politics in some form compulsory in the same way that maths and English is, maybe we'll start to see change.
A funny story about that, actually. I remember when I was running a mock election in my school last year, when I was in year 13, we just went around to some of even just the years below us, even year 12s, and we just asked them some basic questions like what party is the government at the moment, like what colours are the parties, who is the Chancellor. Some answers included that the Conservative colours were green. The Chancellor of the Exchequer was James Cameron.
That does raise serious issues.
This is what I mean. People do not engage with politics because they're not taught about it. It's seen as something sort of removed from everyday life, when in fact it is everyday life, and people just don't get involved with it because they don't know.
Right, I've got a question now on, something that has been spoken a lot about in the last few days is that the older people are deciding the younger generation's future without their consent. And, in terms of actually the statistics, it does play out that older people have, or did rather, predominantly vote to leave, and younger people did, mainly in a majority vote to remain. Should there be this case, Ben, do you think, whereby people can get annoyed at one particular generation for deciding the future generation's vote?
Not really, no, because the argument goes both ways, really, in that, say come to a general election, it's not going to happen, but say youth turnout went way up and old people turnout went way down, and suddenly you get this government elected in which wants to abolish pensions or something, and they say, all these young people have decided this for us. But no, you both get to have your say in the democratic system from your own point of view, because on the one side you have the wisdom of experience, and on the other you have youth and the fact that you're going to have to live with it. And excluding people from voting because essentially you don't agree with them is a dangerous road to go down.
Right, I'm going to get to a vote on this, and whether just on the sort of broad issue of, we're all on perspectives, we all think we know a bit about politics. Did we expect, honestly, the UK to leave the European Union? So if you did think genuinely that we were going to leave, say aye.
Aye.
And Charlie?
Aye.
So you had a sneaky feeling, did you, Barnaby?
I had a feeling. My mum predicted it on the evening, and she's never wrong, unfortunately.
It was going along to some of the campaign events and just seeing politicians stand in front of a battle bus and not actually talking to people. That from that point I realised, It
was the sponsors I got when I was campaigning as well. There was a lot of angry people, and I just felt like that was only going to go one way.
Right. In terms of angry people, there's a second petition going around there's a second referendum petition going around rather where people want another referendum because they don't feel there's an argument that Farage lied and that the Leave campaign lied about 350 million going to the NHS. And there's also some arguments about open borders, that a lot of people who voted Leave voted because they wanted to restrict immigration. And the Leave campaign, now they've won, is saying that isn't actually possible. Do we think this is a legitimate petition that we should redo the election? It was actually started, I think, funnily, by a Leave campaigner who expected to lose. But it hasn't really worked for him, to be fair. Poor man. He's set up he's opened this whole can of worms. Do we think if this does get is there a certain amount of signatures it needs, Barnaby, do you think? Or do you think we can't, disregard a referendum of such a big turnout because of a few angry people in a petition?
I mean, I don't think we should redo the referendum unless some kind of new settlement comes with the European Union. We had to put it to referendum then. One thing we need to remember is it wasn't an advisory referendum, it wasn't legally binding. And also, the margin of people who signed it is more than the amount Leave won by. But on the other hand, I think that it just looks like sour grapes. And while the people who are making the petition do have some reasonable concerns in the Leave campaign, did lie and they actually don't really know what they're doing now that they've won. I don't think they expected to win. You can't just the day after say, oh, actually it was wrong, let's do it again. Maybe in a couple of years down the line if the situation continues to be this bad, but not right now.
Is there an argument to say that the Remain campaign did lie in that, a lot of people argue, they emphasise that, Europe is the reason we'd have a third world war and whatnot, and if Remain had won, this wouldn't be happening and we'd all be laughing at the Leave people angry.
Let's be honest.
Do you think it would be happening?
Nigel Farage himself said a 52-48 victory for Remain would not be the end of the story, and there's been a 52-48 victory for Leave, and apparently that's it, book shut, everyone go home. British people have spoken for eternity. You need to have a bit of perspective around it.
I think Nigel Farage is sort of undeniably a joke at this stage. I mean, you look at the fact that he's gone on Good Morning Britain and basically directly said one of the key Leave campaign policies is a lie. I don't care if he's not part of the campaign. He selectively chose not to address that until after the referendum, as many of the Leave campaigners did. And you look at him in the European Parliament this morning, it's like a smug child who's just won a video game. He's just standing in a political chamber saying, let's have a grown-up and serious discussion, but none of you have ever done a hard day's work in your life. It's embarrassing for our country. But that being said, we've had the referendum, and what we have now is, frankly, a majority that is so slim that our country is divided. And this petition to have another referendum is only going to increase that division. What we need to do now is try and find a middle ground that brings the two perspectives, to name drop the show, together. Because it's completely, it's political chaos at the moment. And it's the student sort of generation in particular is being demonised for reasons like this. And there's a huge amount of people outside of our bubble that really despise people of our generation for reasons that they say, we don't know what hard work's like, we can't accept when we've lost. I think we need to move on now and work out how to reconcile differences. And a good way to have done that would have been the England football team. That's gone out the window, so I don't know what to suggest.
Charlie.
So I think we seriously should have another general election, not another petition, but another general election. Because let's think about what the promises that were made by the Brexit campaign, which was more money on the NHS. It was public services under pressure. It was a feeling of alienation amongst many communities across the country. A feeling that that politicians in Westminster hadn't been listening to them. None of these things will be solved by Brexit. So what this vote was on was very different things from Brexit. Therefore, for what people voted for to leave can only be delivered with a change of government.
And so you think if there is an election in October 2016 or something, Charlie, you'd argue that if Labour were pledging to take us back into the or perhaps the Lib Dems, or they've pledged already that they're going to keep us in the EU. If they were won, then the referendum is effectively not relevant.
It would be up to the British public on who they vote for, and I like what manifesto pledges are put out there. But I do think that ultimately the referendum has to be respected, but I think that the values of this government are not the one. Would not be able to deliver the promises which were made for the Leave campaign.
Right, we've had a few messages in from Mr. Jack Hadfield, and just to let Jack know, we hope he is recovering after he was involved in a violent incident, so we hope you're okay, Jack. But he says, Friday was one of the best days of my life. I ended up singing Rule Britannia as I was walking down Whitehall, and also said the Remain camp forced out some massive lies, much bigger than anything the Leave campaign may have said. There is no way the referendum should be redone. Also, only 20k of the signatures were legit. The campaign was hacked by internet jokers who put on 37k voters from Vatican City, which had population of about 100, and so on. So this is talking about people actually not signing the
sounds a bit
petition.
Like pencils in polling booths, doesn't it, Henry?
It does.
I mean,
indeed.
I don't think the two wrongs make a right school of political argument is one that we should go down. I think the widely accepted fact is that both campaigns lied, and that's more a reflection on politics as a whole, is the fact that Leave's lies are more acceptable than the rest. I think the problem we have now is regret is a real thing. You have a lot of people saying they did vote Brexit and they do regret that. And I actually agree with Charlie. I think a general election, if a party that was running, like the Lib Dems seem to be going down the line of an anti-Brexit platform, if they were to run a general election and win, for example, then I think that would overrule the referendum, because a referendum is an opinion poll and opinions can change over the course of 2 years.
So just to ask you all, if this referendum did get, not the referendum, rather the petition did get a lot of signatures, is there any way perhaps it would get more signatures than people actually voted to remain, for instance. Would there ever be a situation where the referendum could be redone, do we think? So people who think yes, speak now. Oh, Jack?
I think if there is a situation in which the circumstances have significantly changed, if we have 2 years now of political and economic turmoil, and it increasingly becomes clear that Brexit will be hugely damaging to the economy, hugely damaging to our sort of standing in the world, and even if it becomes even more clear that Brexit might not even happen, then I think another referendum would be not even just wanted, but necessary at that point.
Right, we're going to move on now to David Cameron, who has announced he is going to be resigning as Prime Minister because of the result. And here is a little bit of his resignation speech.
I was absolutely clear about my belief that Britain is stronger, safer and better off inside the European Union. And I made clear the referendum was about this and this alone, not the future of any single politician, including myself. But the British people have made a very clear decision to take a different path. And as such, I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction. I will do everything I can as Prime Minister to steady the ship over the coming weeks and months. But I do not think it would be right for me to try to be the captain that steers our country to its next destination. This is not a decision I've taken lightly. But I do believe it's in the national interest to have a period of stability and then the new leadership required. There is no need for a precise timetable today, but in my view we should aim to have a new Prime Minister in place by the start of the Conservative Party conference in October. I love this country and I feel honoured to have served it. And I will do everything I can in future to help this great country succeed. Thank you very much.
My name is Mike O'Brien, former Minister in the Labour government, Foreign Affairs, Trade and other things, and you are listening to Raw.
Right, that was David Cameron speaking about his resignation and saying that he is not going to be leading the country or indeed the Brexit talks after this vote. This obviously opens up a load of things for us in that, do we have to have a general election if a new leader is appointed? Who that new leader is going to be? Is that new leader going to be decided by the 150,000 members of the Conservative Party? Jack, do you think we have to have a general election now if there is to be, as we know there is going to be, a change of Prime Minister?
I think with the change in circumstance, and especially if the new Prime Minister comes from the Leave camp, their manifesto and their cabinet will be entirely different. And I think you then have to get you have to renew your mandate in that case. And I think if Boris Johnson becomes Prime Minister, there will have to be, if Theresa May or somebody who sort of stayed out of the argument a bit more becomes Prime Minister, I think there's less of a case for a general election. But either way, I think it's an important thing, and I think there should be one.
So sort of a Gordon Brown situation where
I think so. They would lack the legitimacy to carry out their manifesto promises.
Ben, do you think we should be having a general election now? David Cameron has resigned and potentially Boris Johnson is going to be his successor?
I do, but it's not a matter of principle based on the idea of changing Prime Minister, because I feel this is a special situation. For example, you mentioned Gordon Brown. While I wish he had held a general election because Labour probably would have won, I don't think he had to morally or justifiably or whatever you want to put it. I don't think a new Prime Minister necessarily has to call a new general election. But in this situation, a general election in October is essentially a referendum on what our future in Europe is, and that is something the country needs.
Barnaby, what do you think about David Cameron resigning firstly? Did you see that coming?
Absolutely, yes. I think he was finished if he'd lost the referendum.
If he'd won the referendum marginally, do you think he would have been finished as well? Because some people seem to suggest that he would have been.
I think he probably still would have resigned, but probably this time next year. He may well have announced an intention to resign the next year or so, but I don't think he would have resigned on the spot like he did.
And if we do get a Brexit Prime Minister now, or indeed a new Prime Minister, do they have to hold a general election?
I think I'm with Ben on this one. I don't think that a new Prime Minister has to hold an election, because technically it's a parliamentary democracy. All it means is that they're now the leader of the party that commands competence in the House. But in the new circumstances, and since they're essentially trying to represent a complete sea change in the UK's approach to sort of foreign policy, I do think a general election should be held, if for nothing else, to form, as not what John Farage wants, a Brexit government, if that's what the people want.
Charlie, what do you think about the idea of another general election in October? Do you think it's what we need?
Well, as I said, I think that fundamentally that if a Brexiteer becomes the leader of the government, they will be unable to fulfil the promises that they put out in their campaign. So I think yes, another general election would be needed. And I also want to say I think it's some very crafty political manoeuvring from Cameron to say that it's up to his successor to trigger Article 50, which is the formal process for leaving. So, particularly if it's Boris Johnson, he gets it becomes Prime Minister. I mean, he's already been backtracking on a lot of his claims today. I think he's going to be up a certain creek without a paddle.
It should be very interesting what's going to happen there. Tim, do you think there will be another general election?
I really hope so. I think what we've seen in the famous Sky News video, which has gone viral, really points this towards us. No one has a plan really on what to do at Brexit. The Sky News reporter describes having a dialogue with a person from the Leave campaign who points towards Leave headquarters and says they've got no clue because they weren't in power, and Number 10 saying they've got no plan either. The only person with a coherent strategy, I think, is Nicola Sturgeon. So what we need is a general election in which case every party running has a policy as to how to address Brexit and what to do with the European Union from there, and then people can vote accordingly, and we can see just how far we're going to go with it. And political engagement, whilst it's disappointing from a young turnout perspective, it's at an all-time high in terms of interest. I think there was 17 million people voting, so it'd be a good time to have an election quite soon.
Right, that is very... And Nigel Farage spoke about the possibility of having a majority Brexit government. We've just voted for Brexit, maybe not the people in this room, but people have voted for Brexit, majority of people. Should the government reflect that up until the general election, do we think? Barnaby, do you think we should have a majority Brexit government?
No. I see the arguments for it, but again, this is an advisory referendum. All that's actually happened is that the general public has told the government they would like to leave the European Union, pretty please, if you don't mind. There is no time frame for this whatsoever. If, as is expected to happen, Boris Johnson becomes Conservative leader, he wants to leave, allegedly, he can form his government along those lines. But there's no obligation for the government currently to reflect the results of a single referendum. That's like saying that the SNP should resign because the Scottish people voted against independence.
Right, so, Ben, do you think we should have a majority Brexit government?
Before a possible general election?
Before a possible general election.
Honestly, I don't think it really matters. I think Cameron's essentially a lame duck Prime Minister. Over the next few months, everyone's going to be obsessed with the Conservative leadership contest, potentially a Labour leadership contest, or whatever goes on there. Very little legislating is going to be done, I feel, to be honest. They're not going to carry on following through with their manifesto because so much has changed that the government essentially is going to be in preservation mode, I think.
And Charlie, can you see this idea of having a majority of cabinet ministers in the next government or in the government up until the election being pro-Brexit? Maybe a Lord Farage in the House of Lords, or Michael Gove being Chancellor or something?
No, I think I completely agree with what's been said.
So you wouldn't be in favour of a majority Brexit government?
I mean, no.
Okay.
I think also what I would like to see is certainly a cross-party committee on Brexit. I think it needs to be, in such a huge decision, it needs to be cross-party with both MPs and Lords.
That is a possibility that could happen. I think it was Cameron who did speak about that briefly, but we've had a message in from Jack Hedford again, who said Article 50 should have been triggered straight away whilst we would lose some time trying to sort out who is going to negotiate the agreement, leaving it to the Remainers an opportunity to fiddle around. Leaving it to the Remainers gives us, he should have said, an opportunity to fiddle around and stuff us all. So Barnaby's giving a sarcastic gesture to you, Jack. Tim, what do you think about this idea of having a majority Brexit government? It's what the people voted for, surely.
It's what the people voted for in an opinion poll. It's whether that you can find a credible amount of politicians who backed Brexit to form a government. I think what's the most important thing is the people who are in government, whether they are pro or anti-Brexit in how they campaigned, actually reflecting the fact that the majority of the British public did want to leave the European Union. And again, it's not just fueled by racism or misinformation. There is a legitimate argument for that, and that's what politicians have to reflect. The problem is, and I think Cameron has reflected this, it's a very partisan debate. So the majority of politicians who are Remain have washed their hands of it and go, well, I'm not going to help the Leave side get what they want, I'm out. And therefore you have a decreasing number of credible politicians who could form a government to endorse Brexit and reflect that kind of will to leave. And you have politicians on the other side. I mean, people like Roger Helmer, who, whilst they did back Brexit and are very convincing speakers, they have some very questionable views on social issues like homophobia and marriage, and you don't really want those sort of people in government, I think. Jack,
do you agree with what's been said there from Tim?
I think that cabinet that is formed after this needs to, in some way, reflect sort of the opinion of the country. So obviously, I think probably a 50-50 kind of spread would be good. And as long as there are some Remainers within high level positions, that's good as well, because the government that forms after October really needs to reunite the country, because we're so divided on this issue. And if we don't reunite the country, it's just going to become worse and worse. And we might even get to a situation like sort of America, where everything is so partisan that there's just no opportunity for sort of agreement between parties, and I think that's a real risk. It needs to be solved.
Thank you very much, Jack. Right now, before we go to a song, Jack Hadfield has again messaged in but on the issue, and it said there certainly needs to be a pro-Brexit Prime Minister, and the Cabinet should lean in a majority Brexit decision, but we have to bring in the Remain side now. As the referendum is done, we need reconciliation. Right, so do people agree that we should have a pro-Brexit leaning Cabinet? All those in favour say aye. All those against?
Aye.
Ben's not sure there.
My name's Giles Brandreth, and this is Perspectives.
This is my swamp!
Warwick Student Cinema are doing an outdoor screening of Shrek.
We'll never make it in time! Never fear, but where there's a will, there's a way, and I have a way.
Come on down to the Piazza at 10 p.m. on the 28th of June to check it out.
Well, yeah.
And the best part is, it's completely free.
Mirror, mirror on the wall, is this not the most perfect kingdom of them all?
Grab your friends and some popcorn and join us for some Shrek.
That's what friends are for, right?
My name's Toby Young, and you're listening to Perspectives.
Right, so we have discussed David Cameron so far and the Brexit result, but now we're going to move on to a party that is perhaps in more turmoil than the Conservative Party. You can see Barnaby rubbing his hands together and getting ready for this conversation. And this is the conversation of the Labour Party, which has been going through a pretty rough patch in the last week, or since the election. And this is all sort of kicked off from when Hilary Benn resigned at about 1 o'clock. On, I think it was Saturday?
Sunday morning it was.
Sunday morning, right, there we go. Technically Saturday night if you were out at the club having a good time.
Which I was.
Which you were, fair enough. So Hilary Benn resigned, and it's all sort of kicks off from there. We've seen a lot of shadow cabinet ministers resigning, and only recently, in the last day, I think Corbyn has been beginning to fill those seats. Going to start off with the broad question, Barnaby. You know, is Labour in any fit state to win, to not win or even compete in this election in 2016?
Well, right now, no. Right now, there isn't even enough ministers, MPs able to serve as ministers in the shadow cabinet. So that's not. So the idea of being a realistic alternative government literally isn't possible right now. If through some miracle Jeremy Corbyn's become prime minister, he would not be able to find enough MPs to staff a functioning government. So no. On the other hand, if Corbyn does leave and a more moderate leader replaces him, obviously Labour can be. Whether they're credible enough to win or even compete well in an election is another question. But yeah.
You're telling me that Corbyn might end up being a shadow minister for a couple of things, Barnaby.
Yeah,
tell us about that.
The talk is that Corbyn and John McDonnell are willing to speak on shadow briefs in Commons if they can't find a minister. I believe they're currently without a shadow business secretary. They offered the job and it was turned down after Angela Eagle resigned. So yeah, he's so determined to cling on that he's willing to give himself even more work than he already has.
Ben, what do you think about this whole situation with Labour? As someone who I know is quite partial to a bit of Jeremy Corbyn, what do you think?
Well, I'm the soft left Labour voter that Jeremy won on last time, I think, and I voted for Corbyn, and I don't regret voting for him, but I do feel it's his time to go. I feel he's shown he isn't able to unite the party enough. If he'd been able to unite the party as I hoped he had, then I would be behind him, but he's not cut out for the job. John McDonnell, I think, has been great as Chancellor, but Corbyn hasn't grown into his role the same way.
So if there was a leadership election again, you wouldn't even consider voting for Corbyn?
It depends who runs against him. I think if there was a leadership election, I wouldn't be surprised if the party coalesced around Corbyn would run, and it'd be some kind of unity candidate, which I think it could be Dan Jarvis, Lisa Nandy, there's talk of Tom Watson. Someone like that I would strongly consider voting for over Corbyn.
Charlie, what do you think of this whole situation with the Labour Party?
So, as in a similar way to Tom, I was on the slightly to the left of the soft left and voted for Jeremy because I didn't feel like any of the other candidates were particularly inspiring. But just the events of the past few days has put the party into disarray. And I have lost confidence in Jeremy Corbyn's ability to lead the party or win an election. And I think the way that he's been dragging it out has been is frustrating, because what the election of Jeremy Corbyn has proved is that there is a genuine appetite amongst members for left-wing leadership, and Jeremy's election proved that. However, he also needs to unite his parliamentary Labour Party, who are not behind him, and ultimately it's the parliamentary Labour Party that are going to get in, that need to be elected and form the government. And if they're not united, then we cannot be a Labour opposition. We cannot provide the opposition which is so desperately needed. So I think it's time for Jeremy to step aside. His victory has been momentous. It's shown that there is appetite for the left. And I think that had he been savvier, he could have negotiated a better position for the left in a future cabinet.
Jack says that Jan Jarvis is the candidate that the Conservative Party should certainly fear, but I don't think it is time to lead just yet. It would be a shame for Labour to waste him like the Tories did with Hague. That's an interesting stance on it. Jack, do you think Corbyn has ultimately, I mean, if he is losing the trust of the people that voted for him, he's got to stand aside, surely?
I think his position within the Parliamentary Labour Party now is basically untenable, and it'll be interesting to see if he hangs on for even a few more weeks what actually the future of the Labour Party is, because I can't see that the soft left and even the Blairite wing put up with this that much longer. I don't know whether a split in the Labour Party seems unlikely, because both, like we were saying in the break, are so desperate to keep the name, the Labour Party. But I mean, the Social Democrat wing are so sort of, I guess you could call them the Social Democrat wing, the soft left, are so divided from the I guess you could call hard left, that I can't see, if Jeremy Corbyn doesn't stand down, I can't see them being reconciled anytime soon.
But this is a big, I mean, the Labour Party is traditionally, if you were going to split it into two wings, as Jack has said, it'd be the Social Democrat Party and the perhaps socialist, many would call them militant, Marxist wing. Can they, they disagree on pretty much everything. They disagree on a lot. Can they realistically be in the same party together?
I think there are more wings than just that. I mean, it's
there are, no, but I'm saying
I understand what you mean. I feel that what I'll call the moderates, what used to be the sort of, well, you have the sort of the soft left, the Blairites, such as they are, Social Democrats. The moderate wing agrees on a lot more with each other than they do with the sort of hard left socialist campaign group. I think the problem is for Jeremy Corbyn now that the people who voted for him don't have nearly as big a mandate as the 9.5 million people who voted for these more moderate MPs. This isn't a Blairite revolt. This is a revolt of the soft left, even of the fairly hard left. People like Richard Burden, who are sort of bigger Palestine campaigns and like that, are no longer supporting Corbyn. So I don't think it's a matter of issue of the Labour Party itself being divided. There are issues with its core vote. I think it's a battle between the kind of very enthusiastic left-wing activists and the more kind of pragmatic, we want to get stuff done voters who then put these more moderate MPs into power.
So far we've had people like Barnaby and Jack saying that they think Corbyn should go, despite, perhaps not agreeing with his ideology and certainly not voting for him if they were members of the Labour Party. Ben and Charlie, who are perhaps partial to Corbyn, both saying that, whilst they did vote for him, or in Ben's case he did, they wouldn't vote for him again. Tim, do you think Corbyn should stay on?
Well, yeah, first of all, I've got to apologise for being late back into the studio after the break. I actually got, funnily enough and appropriately enough, caught in the corridor having a debate with Isaac Leo, actually President, about this very issue of Corbyn's leadership. And I think I've publicly said I support Jeremy Corbyn in being Labour leader. Isaac very strongly disagrees with me. And so does one of the members of the sports team, Dan Lippman, who's very informed in politics. It's very hard to be a pro-Corbyn vote at the moment, and my faith has very much been shaken. I think the latest I've heard from Dan, actually, I can't remember off the top of my head who it is, but another person has resigned after, I think, 18 hours in a job or something.
It's Pat Glass. Pat Glass. She's stepping down as an MP. She's still Shadow Education Secretary, but she's stepping down at the next general election,
which could be imminent.
Yeah, I think I don't know what to think. I think
that's really unusual.
We're through the looking glass here, kids.
What I'm clinging on to is I think that what Brexit has represented is a really strong and conscious movement away from the political classes by the British people, even though they voted for people who are, inverted commas, very much part of the establishment. And I think with a lot of these Brexit promises being broken, and a lot of the bravado of the likes of Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson and David Cameron in Commons, if you look at the way he's been addressing Corbyn in Prime Minister's questions, I feel in my heart, I hope we're moving away from that kind of politics. And so I think Jeremy Corbyn could represent some kind of alternative in the future if there was a general election. But I think the problem is, from what I'm hearing, whilst I'm a Jeremy Corbyn supporter and I think he should be given a chance, I'm not sure he can make it to a general election. And it's with a heavy heart, I admit that, but I can't deny that the Labour Party's position today appears almost untenable, like going forwards.
I think Charlie was making the point that a lot of the things Corbyn disagrees with, the Labour Party does disagree with, and if they're going to oppose, I know Charlie's very passionate about the higher education papers, if they are going to oppose that, they have to do that as a united opposition,
exactly,
rather than just one man and his strong views. Right, I'm going to ask the panel now. The Labour Party, obviously, I've spoken about this split. Do we honestly think it can carry on having the same people in it? Can you still have a group of Jeremy Corbyn and Chuka Umunna in the same party? John McDonnell and Dan Jarvis. Can they realistically be under the same ticket or bracket, Barnaby?
Yes, because look at the Tories, but not in the current culture of Labour, which has been prevalent for the last sort of 10 years, I'd say.
Well, Nigel Farage did come out the other day and say that he thinks a lot of the Blairites, as he called them, will defect to the Lib Dems.
No.
I don't think many people can see that happening.
The Labour name is too valuable, as we were talking about during the break. The Labour name is the sign-off of the opposition party in the UK, the second biggest party. Unless the Labour Party itself rebrands, there is going to be no major breakaway, because they tried that in the 80s. The SDP were, very popular for a time, but they weren't Labour. They didn't have the organisational skill. They didn't have the name association. So I think unless there's a complete sea change in how political parties are formed, the Labour Party will continue.
Can people see any defections, though, to more moderate parties? So, could you even see a Labour to Conservative defection? Could you see a Labour to Lib Dem?
See John Mann to UKIP.
I mean, I still think that you mentioned the various figures, but I still like to think that there still are core values that go across the factional divides, that of being a party of trade unions and a party of working people. And those two values, I think, are shared by every single MP.
Right. Tim, what do you think about this idea of having Corbyn and more moderates in the same party? Do you think it can carry on fighting elections under the same banner?
I don't think the situation can stay as it is, because with this much infighting, how are you supposed to, inspire the general public into voting into you? I think the Labour Party needs to decide whether it's going to be a sort of centre-left party or a far-left party, and I think historically it has fought for workers' rights in a very socialist way. I think a lot of its voters now, the people who voted Corbyn in, do hold these socialist values, but the party has to address whether these kind of values are going to be ones that are applicable to the general public. And you have people who are within the Labour Party questioning Jeremy Corbyn for being so left-wing. What are the general public, people who voted UKIP and Conservative, how are they going to react to that? And I think they're going to have to be very clever about how they pitch the marketing of it almost, how they're going to sell Jeremy Corbyn. And I don't have any answers at the moment, but I think I think I have faith in the Labour Party appealing to a wider audience with Jeremy Corbyn. I don't know if that can happen.
Right, we've had a Facebook message in from Elaine Mills, who says, loving the show, like the format, appreciate the level of insight. Impressive. So there's a compliment to all of you there on the panel as Tim raises his coffee to everyone. And just let you know as well, please get involved in the conversation today. We are very interested as to what you think. Email studio@radio.warwick.ac.uk. You can tweet us at Perspectives Raw. You can tweet at Raw 12:51am. Click the contact tab if you're listening online, or message the Facebook page as Elaine has just done. Right, so Barnaby, you were saying then that you don't think these people would defect from the Labour Party because the name is so valuable. So if they're not going to defect, can you see the Corbyn McDonnells defecting? They would argue Labour through and through, but you have Dave Nellist of Tusk who perhaps argues more with these people. Can you see a new socialist party?
I do think if Corbyn is ousted, you could well see the machinery of Corbyn's leadership, organisations like Momentum,
Respect.
Arguably, forming themselves into a sort of Respect-style party, which might do fairly well in urban areas. I mean, Respect have done well in the past in places like Bow Green.
Yes, I think it was.
So I can certainly see it happening, but I think it also depends on whether Corbyn is violently forced out over a series of weeks, or if he eventually sort of looks in the mirror and is like, mate, what am I doing? Which seems unlikely at the moment.
Right. Right, so do we think, everyone's loving that, Stab, I think, do people think that the Labour Party, firstly, have any chance of winning the next election, under what circumstances they might be in 2016? So if anyone does think they have a chance of winning the next election, say aye.
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 All who do not think so.
Aye.
Aye.
Right, and all those people who think the Labour Party can remain united, they can be the Labour Party for the next 20 years. I suppose a lot of this does depend, actually, on whether we get proportional voting, but that is an argument for another day. But in 20 years' time, will we still see the same Labour Party with the socialist wing and the Blairite wing and all the other wings? Do people think that will be the case? Say aye.
Aye.
And who thinks there'll be a split? Ooh.
I think there'll be a split. But I think the split will be slightly different. I think that the Labour Party at the moment has a slight split from the people that naturally vote for them. So if you look at the EU referendum, the coalition of people that voted for out is the working class people that naturally vote Labour, but socially are perhaps more conservative, and joined with the Tory right wing. And I think for decades, the split in politics has been along economic lines, and it's the economy stupid. It's been the thing for decades now, ever since perhaps before even Thatcher and Reagan. But I think in the last year or so, we've seen an even bigger sort of move towards more social, sort of a culture war type thing, which is what you see in America now. And I don't know whether we'll see a new sort of series of parties aligning along those lines, but I think in the last few years there has been a big shift in the
what Drac said. I've changed my mind.
I mean, that is something that is going to be very interesting when we come back for Perspectives, perhaps this time in October, as to whether Labour will have to change their policies to appeal to these people up north, to appeal to the so-called, UKIP-leaning Labour voters that did vote Leave, and that will be a big issue, and that is going to be very interesting. But before we go on to the Perspectives quiz, just a quick conversation about the Liberal Democrats. They have seen a rise of over 7,000 members now since Thursday, which was the day of the EU referendum. Perhaps some people like Barnaby, who were, I know you didn't join the Lib Dems, but some people who were disaffected by Jeremy Corbyn, and perhaps Hilary Benn was the final straw. Barnaby, do we think they have a future? And now they've got their pro-EU stance. Are they going to do pretty well in 2016, do we think?
I mean, not in 2016, but this has certainly given them a boost. I mean, Tim Farron has been one of the most impressive speakers in sort of the English Parliament on sort of how he deal with Brexit and how he resist it. And they have a sort of unique position now in that they are the most unabashed in favour of Europe party, more or less. And even if they a campaign just for Britain to stay in the EEA, for example, something like that, they certainly represent a home for disaffected members of Labour, the Tories, even possibly Greens, who feel like they're a better sort of vehicle for their policies. So yes, I think they're on the way up again.
By the way, Jack Cadfield has said if Labour don't change, UKIP will definitely take the North at the next election, so we'll have to see what happens there. Ben, do you think the Lib Dems now have a unique selling point that they can recover from / get more seats back?
Yeah, I think now that they're out of coalition, they're going to see a natural resurgence, which they were always going to do anyway. I have to say I was a little taken aback at first when Barnaby said Tim Farron was an impressive speaker, because this is the third time I think I've mentioned this on Perspectives, but I stand by it being one of the most pressing political issues of our time. Tim Farron rapping in favour of the European Union is a disgrace. Have you not seen the video? I recommend that everyone watch the video.
He did rap.
That is a big dog mentality right there.
Charlie, what do you think about the Lib Dems now? Do they have their unique selling point, or do you think they will never recover and they'll stay at about 8 or 5 seats?
No, I think we'll definitely see a Lib Dem resurgence.
You think that will happen? Tim, what do you think about the future of the Liberal Democrats? They've seen a number of new members now. What's going to happen?
Well, I wanted to make a really clever Jay-Z 99 Problems joke, but I haven't managed to get you one, so I'll say something sensible. So I think if Lib Dems become that party that run with the anti-Brexit line as their kind of unique selling point, then they could really get a resurgence of support. I mean, I'm one of the few people who doesn't despise Nick Clegg with a passion. He was hung out to dry and sort of crucified for a lot of people's kind of discontent. I think he was actually, by the standards of career politicians, a very good person. And I think he would have been a very good politician if he'd been given more time. But at the same time, I think the Lib Dems now, they've gone through so much turmoil. They've lost all the seats. And I'm sure, as you know, Henry, it's not been the greatest time. But I think now there's a unique opportunity for them to kind of redefine what being a Lib Dem voter represents. And I think that is maybe a sort of a fleeting ray of sunshine in the storm clouds above.
And Jack, finally, do you think the Lib Dems have a unique selling point now and a future to do well and, maybe get back half of the seats they lost in 2015?
This is sort of the silver lining in the cloud of Brexit for me, is that for the first time since being a Lib Dem supporter, I actually have hope for the future of the party, in that I think that now Labour can never be a pro-EU party totally, because their supporters voted for Brexit. And I don't think the Conservative Party could ever be, because they're so split on it. So I think the Lib Dems could really do well at the next election.
Right, we only have a bit of time left, but we need to have our final Perspectives quiz of the year. So if I can ask that microphone to be given to the Tim, Jack and Charlie team, and the other team will be the Ben and Barnaby team. And this is our final Perspectives quiz of the year.
My name's Dave Nellis, and you're now to listen to the Perspectives quiz.
Right, are you all sitting comfortably?
Just about.
I think everyone is excited for this particular quiz this week. First team is Barnaby and Ben, as I just said, and the second team is Charlie, Tim and Jack. First question: who said this week that the European Parliament are not laughing now?
Buzz, Nigel Farage.
Buzz, Nigel Farage, correct.
Oh.
Second question: what is the name of the SNP MEP who has hit the news today with a speech about how Scotland don't want Brexit?
Come on, Jack, you're head of news.
Not a clue. It was a good speech, but not a clue.
Unfortunately, it's not what a clue. It is Alan Smith. Which of these... Good Scottish name. Which of these people is allegedly not running for Tory party leader? Is it Nicky Morgan, Jeremy Hunt or George Osborne?
George Osborne.
I think they got that. We'll give you that. Who is Stephen Crabb allegedly running his Tory leadership campaign with? Barnaby. Sajid Javid is correct. This is very quick fire this week. Where was Tom Watson when Hilary Benn resigned?
Glastonbury.
Glastonbury, and I ran into him at the Bread Noses pub.
Did you? Do you know what? Because Charlie was there,
you win that one.
he's
Yes,
getting
Charlie.
the point for that.
I'll have to see that.
Can you name 5 members of the new shadow cabinet?
Buzz. Clive Lewis, Cat Smith, Pat Glass, Jeremy Corbyn, Emily Thornberry, Diane Abbott, John McDonnell.
We'll give you that.
A bust of Trotsky, the ghost of Lenin, and John McDonnell's copy of the Little Red Book.
Can you name 5 people who resigned from the shadow cabinet?
Angela Eagle, Maria Regal. We've also got Heidi Alexander, we've got Lucy Powell, we've got Chris Bryant, we've got Owen Smith, we've got Lisa Nandy.
Correct, you've got that. And the final question: which Labour MP was the first to call Parliament to ignore the referendum result?
Buzz. David Lammy.
David Lammy is correct. Right, that is it for Perspectives this year. Thank you very much for tuning in, if you have. Thank you to all the panellists I've had on all the weeks. It's been great to have you on. It's been great to get some different political insights, so thank you. But fear not, we will be back in October with some more politics news, and going to be analysing another general election, which will be a lot of work for me and you, Jack, I think, on the Raw exec. But that is to be looked forward to. So thank you again if you've listened. Thanks if you listened to today's show. Don't forget, Perspectives Raw will still be active on Twitter right throughout the summer. You can get all of our podcasts online on the YouTube if you just type in Perspectives Radio on YouTube, and you can listen to all of them there, as well as our latest election special show. So thanks again.